Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. President Muhammadu Buhari finally signed the dotted lines on the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. The fear of exposing the Nigerian worker and the manufacturing sector to the uncertainties of a unified African market was one of the reasons given by the president for the initial foot dragging. But now that Nigeria is fully in the picture on the march towards a single unified African market, to what extent would this affect the welfare of the Nigerian worker, or, if you like, the manufacturing sector in Nigeria? Now, to answer these and other related, and analyze other related issues, we are now being joined by Chris Onyeka, Deputy General Secretary of the United Labour Congress, an organization which before this time maintained a strong view on the subject of a single African market. Welcome to the program.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Now, you listened to my introduction.
Yes.
But I ask you, as at March last year, organized labor was saying, look, this is not good for Nigeria. We don't want it. Chambers of commerce protested, civil society protested. In November 2018, the president set up a committee to look at the matter in terms of impact and readiness assessment. And then now, in Niamey, in Niger, the president has signed after expressing his reservations. What has actually changed? Nigeria practically lost out on the phase one negotiations, leading to the adoption and ratification of the document. Yeah. What changed?
Yeah, we were worried when the initial arrangements during the Rwanda signing ceremony, we were worried. We supported the president because we felt that the president told the nation that they had not studied the documents very well, and they had not studied the framework very well. And we felt that the president of a nation that has said he does not understand the framework very well, they have not studied documents very well, and as a result of that, they were not going to sign. And we say, yes, if you have not studied the document very well and you do not understand the framework very well, then the onus is on you not to. And we also had reservations because we felt that if they did not understand this framework very well and the final, the outcome document, it means that our jobs will be impacted via adverse competition from especially companies, not companies that originated from Africa, but companies that have Western input. Because what it will mean is that European nations, European companies, will prefer setting up companies outside of Nigeria, especially so that they will avoid the bottlenecks that we have in manufacturing in Nigeria and also be able to access our market. So we felt a danger. It is better that safeguards are built into that framework to protect Nigerian industries and protect Nigerian workers so that the problem of unemployment that is actually increasing every day would not be exacerbated by putting pen on paper on that particular agreement. That was why we supported them. And we felt that there was a need for the stakeholders to be carried along so that we understand this document, so that we understand what we are stepping into. We have a lot of frameworks that Nigeria is a member of that we are not benefiting from. And so we felt that we should all sit down and talk. But unfortunately, we were also surprised that Mr. President has gone in his own wisdom to sign without involving, but he said he consulted the critical stakeholders. We were not part of that critical stakeholders that were consulted. Perhaps they felt the Nigerian workers were not important. And so they went ahead to do that, which to us is inappropriate. But as trade union leaders, we would look at ourselves and see how best.
No, I don't understand what you are saying. The excuse for not going to, for not being in Kigali,
yes,
on March 21, 2018,
yeah,
was that there was need for consultation.
Yes.
And Nigeria, stepped back, even after we had been informed that
yes,
the Federal Executive Council had decided that Nigeria would be there, and the Minister of Trade, Industry and Investment had told us that Nigeria was ready. Now you are saying that you were not consulted.
Yes.
That you were excluded.
Yeah.
And that you are surprised that the president has signed it. Can you shed more light on that?
No, we were surprised because, like you did you presented in your intro, that the critical stakeholders were going to be consulted before. It was designed to protect workers, jobs of Nigerian workers. And so we felt that workers, representative of workers, Nigerian workers, ought to have been part of that consultation. But we were not.
Could it be that the leadership of the TUC and the NLC were part of it, and ULC wasn't invited, and this is about the politics of your union, organized labor, rather than an omission on the part of government?
Yeah, we know that we work with government on certain issues. Now, like I just came back from the ILO, the International Labour Conference, and we're part of the government delegation. And so we are critical, we represent critical stakeholders in the nation's labor movement. When you talk of the oil and gas sector, when you talk of the banking sector, when you talk of railways, when you talk of the electricity sector, the critical sectors of the Nigerian society they are the workers that we represent. And as such, if you want to do anything that would affect these sectors, we believe that it is important that we are consulted. But I'm telling you that I'm sure the Nigerian Labour Congress may not have been consulted, TUC may not have been consulted, because if there was such consultation, letters would have been written to all the labour centres. The Ministry of Labour normally writes ULC for such occasions, and we oblige them and we send representation. Okay. But in this case, we did not receive any of such, and there was no representation sent from our side.
Okay, let's stick to the very crucial matters on this actual agreement itself. Now, speaking of framework, let's look at the Standard Organization of Nigeria, let's take customs, and let's also take NAFDAC as well. These are three main controls against bad products. So, of course, the government is going to have to ensure some sort of framework for these three bodies, given this agreement. What sort of framework do you think we should expect to see going into place in NAFDAC, in customs, and also in the Standard Organization of Nigeria?
NAFDAC is already an African standard. I've set the pace in terms of standardization of product and control. Many other nations of Africa have come here to understudy what was done. And so in that, I think that we are also miles ahead. But one thing is clear, even the entire framework, is we are going to start the trading phase by next year.
Well, frameworks to prevent dumping anyway, because that's of great concern.
Well, but there will be dumping in Nigeria. That is the truth. If by the time we do not take care of certain things in this country, there will be dumping. One of the biggest fears we have is that there will be dumping.
So what framework can prevent or reduce the prevalence of dumping of goods in Nigeria given this agreement?
If you have signed an agreement that allows other nations, especially of Europe, to set up factories in, say, Benin. Though Benin has not signed, I don't know whether they signed in Niamey, or set up in Ghana, and probably assess infrastructure, good infrastructure in those places, and they produce cheaply. Which market are they looking for? Nigerian market. And so you have signed an agreement that allows them to assess your market. How are you going to prevent dumping? They are going to produce to standard. You are going to use NAFDAC to say, okay, like they do in some other societies, and they say, this does not meet our standard. But I believe that also the framework is going to take into consideration these standards. There is going to be a custom union that eventually is going to lead to a custom union. A
Continental
custom union, yes, is going to lead to that. And then eventually there will be a standard in terms of products and all those that will also be part of that framework. And so it's going to be standard. The framework eventually, I understand, should be able to take care of these standards that you're talking about.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, the Economic Commission for Africa, ECA, based in Addis Ababa, has done an assessment after the launch of the AfCFTA in Niamey. Okay. And one of the points in that document is about the crisis of implementation. Do you think that this is real, or the ECA is just crying foul? And if there is indeed a crisis of implementation as alleged, what are the areas where we'll have the red flags? And what can Nigeria do about this now that Nigeria has signed the document?
We've signed that document, but have we actually deposited have we ratified it and deposited it with the
ratification is the second step?
Exactly. Have we done that? It's only until we do that would trigger our full membership. But then let's leave that aside and then look at the issue that you raised, which is very critical. We know not only in Nigeria and in other African countries, implementation is always a critical phase. You look at the ECOWAS Treaty. What are the bottlenecks? I was involved as a growing person in the intra-African trade. I had one company that I was using to move goods around the continent. I knew the challenges that I had as a Nigerian, especially in the West African sub-region. Okay? Issues of the so-called, some people raise, some nations raise some bogus standards that we know does not exist there. But because you're a Nigerian bringing in your goods, they suddenly raise standards that are not there, that were not there before you initiated the export of your goods. And so you are going to have those challenges, especially challenges that come from a kind of a complex. As a Nigerian, and you're doing business in West Africa, you are challenged because of your Nigerianness. And so a lot of bottlenecks that are hitherto not there will be raised against you. Okay? Issues of trying to look at what you are bringing because of is it a stereotype of the Nigerian as a drug pusher. And so your goods are subjected to the kind of scrutiny that other goods from other nations will not be subjected to. That is discouraging. And so you have monetary issues in terms of implementation. If you're going to go into 2019, 2020 with implementation, how are you going to take care? ECOWAS has come up with ECO. How are you going to take care of the financial arrangements? How are you going to take care of funding and all those?
Monetary integration is part of the agenda. Yeah.
Yes, it's part of the agenda. What is still way off. Remember that this is going to happen in 2019, in 2020. Food trade is going to start 2020, July 1st. Then money integration or financial integration may not have been put in place before then. And so we have a whole lot of issues. You are going to have politics. You are going to have insecurity as a problem, as a big challenge. How are you going to? You are going to have issues of movement of individuals across international boundaries. How are you going to take care of that? How are you going to take care of a man driving his vehicle filled with his goods, moving from here to Ghana? What are the obstacles he's going to meet along the way? And what of issues of shipping? Issues of intra-African aviation? These are some of the issues, and they are critical. Now, Africa has to address the infrastructural deficits in most of our continents before. But
now they'll be forced to. But given this agreement, they'll be forced to look into those things because that's the only way that things can operate and function. But what's also interesting here is that the agreement says that tariffs are going to be placed on 90% of products moving across intra-African trade. But there's still a 10% that is not spoken about. Do you have any idea of what this 10% of products may be, by any chance, or what they could be? Okay, so the agreement says that 90% of tariffs for intra-African trade are going to be taken out. Okay. 10% of tariffs are therefore still going to exist. Do you have any idea of what this may be?
Probably for kind of operational cost and the rest for the countries that are receiving imports, or probably to facilitate. When you are looking at some of these things, there has to be operational cost. And that is what some of us thought when you look at...
maybe administrative costs.
Administrative costs, something like that operational cost. So we think that may be the reason why you have that.
You refer
I don't think it's a critical problem.
You refer to infrastructure deficit.
Yes.
How much of a threat is the infrastructure deficit and security? You also talked about security, conflicts, and all of that. How much of a threat is it to the achievement of the objectives of the, Continental Free Trade Agreement, or perhaps, the African Agenda 20 years 63? But before you answer that, we'll take a short break, and then we'll be right back, and then you can talk about infrastructure deficit and security and conflict in Africa as a problem. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Still with us in the studio is Onyeka, Deputy General Secretary of the United Labour Congress, who is helping us to do a review of the signing by Nigeria of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. And before we went on break, you were talking about, security and conflicts, infrastructure deficit. That was a question before we took a break. Do you want to comment further on that?
Yeah. When you look at, especially the sub-Saharan Africa, and then probably you look at also the Maghreb region, the Sahel region, the region between West Africa and Northern Africa, you find out that these are hot areas that are steeped in insecurity. It will be very, very difficult for goods and services, actually when you talk about land, about transport, to move across boundaries on land through those areas because of insecurity. I would give you an example of what happened when I was physically involved in trading across Africa. And myself and some of my colleagues took some goods to Sierra Leone, to Freetown, and came in and went to the port to clear some of the goods. Then conflagration. We lost those goods because we ran away and decided to come back home. Our life was more important. We lost that business, and a lot of people are also experiencing that across Africa, across these regions I've talked about. But we thank God that the crisis in those places have piped down. But look at Baga, where you have the fishing area and the Chad area. I remember after graduation, that was about 30 years ago, I took a trip to Cameroon by land from Maiduguri, Bama. I crossed over to Cameroon, then to Chad, to Niger, as a young person trying to explore. It was easy. I traveled throughout the night. There was no problem. There was nothing. And people were also following these routes. But today, you cannot do them. And this is Africa that we're talking about free trade. So it's not going to work. It's going to have problems. I'm not saying it's not going to work entirely, but it's going to have issues. And most of the time, you find out that most of the goods that involves Africans are the ones that are done by land, but through our borders on land. Forget about the ones done by huge behemoths.
SMEs.
Yes.
Small and medium scale.
And those are the ones we want to encourage. Those are the ones that have to be encouraged. And the very route they use for this business, for this trade, are entirely insecure. That is on that aspect.
About 70% of African trade.
And then look at infrastructure. The road network there. Now, these places, I'm talking about things I've done physically. And there is actually no road. In some places, you just drive. The drivers have compass in their head. They just drive. They know their destination. But there is no road. They say, okay, this is paved road that you can drive on. But they drive in the desert. And they know where they're going to. And they get you to your destination. And so we need the roads. We need road. We need transport. There is road that will facilitate land transport. Without that. And then, we're talking about African free trade. You're talking about creation of goods. How do you create goods? You manufacture. You need infrastructure to manufacture. Is it in Nigeria that you want to manufacture? We have serious supply bottlenecks in the nation to respond to whatever advantages that are going to accrue as a result of this. And so, what are you going to set up here without having to spend your money on a whole lot of things? So across the continent, it's not just in Nigeria. Go to Liberia, go to Sierra Leone, and all those other small nations. You have some of the pockets of these issues. Yes, they may have stable electricity, but the roads are not there.
How do you personally feel the government is going to react to all of this? Because one point that we do know is that the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement is an agreement that, of course, is going to open up the books and make the government look at the fact that there are so many different loopholes that need to be covered and filled. Things that you're mentioning right now. How do you really think the government is going to respond and react to these things? The hurdles that we face when it comes to manufacturing, such as infrastructure. What sort of reaction do you think we're going to see from the government? Because now that we have this agreement, there's a lot that they have to look at to fix.
Very good question. The fact is, we want to say probably the way government ought to respond. And then we'll now face the reality on the ground. Will government act according to the ideal? Now, a responsible government would naturally, look at the bottlenecks in terms of the infrastructure we've talked about, the insecurity we have talked about, and tell itself that we're going to free manufacturers, businesses in Nigeria, from this infrastructural decay. We're going to make sure electricity works. We're going to make sure, energy in terms of petroleum products are delivered across board. We're going to make sure that the nation works so that we can take advantage of this expanded market. but will government do this? That's a different ballgame altogether.
That's the question I'm asking you.
Now, we have thought of a responsible government that ought to do, but are our leaders that responsible? That's a different thing altogether. Look at the ECOWAS situation. Have we taken advantage of the expansive market that the ECOWAS offers? Companies, are they not leaving Nigeria and going to Ghana to establish as we talk? Nigeria is undergoing the manufacturing. So who says that this further expanded market will be taken advantage of? If our leaders continue acting the way they are acting, are they going to take advantage of that? My sister, I will tell you that no. Given my experience in this nation, nobody is critically thinking on how to assess this expanded market. Nobody is thinking, nobody is sitting down, okay, thinking of how to take advantage of what this thing offers. That has always been my problem. We invest money, we throw money at issues. We throw money at ECOWAS. We throw money at ECOMOG. We throw money at taking care of liberating South Africa, at Angola. But we fell short of taking advantage of the money that we have spent.
Chris, let me ask you a question. I mean, Leila raised a point earlier on about 90% tariffs.
Yes.
A 10% window. You know, perhaps the truth is that that 10% is the territorial shelter. You know, it's the window that has been provided.
For the nations.
Not necessarily for administrative costs, but, you know, for territorial shelter. But there is an issue that has been very controversial, and it's about rules of origin. And the committee that was set up by the president, you know, raised the point about Nigeria looking for safeguards to address the challenge of rules of origin.
Yes.
Do you want to shed more light on this as somebody who has done business across West Africa over the last 30 years? What exactly is the devil in the detail about rules of origin?
It's the issue of dumping. Issue of nations outside of Africa taking advantage of the nations around us, okay, to bring in their goods, change the packaging in a country like, say, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Republic of Benin. And they change the packaging. For Christ's sake, you were not there. And they change the packaging, and they put it made in Ghana, made in Côte d'Ivoire, made in Republic of Benin. And it moves in as a product from Africa into Nigeria, assessing all the benefits. And so, in essence, we have to protect our market. And also the rules of origin, okay, talks about this. How do we ensure that the goods that somebody is saying was manufactured in Republic of Benin was actually manufactured in Republic of Benin, instead of manufactured somewhere in France? I'm afraid one of my basic fears is this, that most of the nations of Africa, especially, are tied to the upper strings of their colonial masters. And when you look at even the Continental Free Trade Agreement, it's a document that was copied from foreign trade agreements. I'm not saying that we shouldn't copy, okay? But at least it should be made African. It should be an African document. There has to be an originality. Somebody somewhere has propped up African leaders to come up with that so that they can access certain markets. And one of the markets targeted is the Nigerian market. They want to access Nigerian market without the challenges of setting up business in Nigeria. And so the rules of origin is critical. And I wonder how we are going to ensure that that does not happen. Because you're not going to be there when I'm going to start importing. I'm telling you that somebody like me, if I'm a businessman, I will simply relocate to the Republic of Benin. I will import a lot of things that are very cheap, that I can bring in from China. I change the packaging and bring them in as made in Africa, made in ECOWAS, and then move it into Nigeria. And so it's a problem. And so we have to look at that. Why we want to encourage manufacturing to be expanded throughout Africa, we should not encourage unfair competition against Nigerian manufacturers.
Because that can then, of course, hurt both. And that's a very viable point to make, the notion of unfair competition and actually trying to avoid that. I agree. Well,
you just raised a point now when you said, look, you can bring in something from elsewhere, package it and all that. And intellectual property rights is one of the issues, in the agreement that has been signed. And it's likely to be in the phase 2 of the agreement, one of the contentious issues.
Yes.
Now, what kind of monitoring mechanisms can Nigeria and maybe other countries put in place to ensure that intellectual property does not become a threat, to this agreement? I mean, look at China and the U.S. Intellectual property rights, remain part, a strong part of the trade war between the two countries. So what monitoring mechanisms will you advise or recommend?
Oh, I think we have institutions that are already on, to protect the intellectual property of Nigeria and Nigerians.
I bet you make it sound so easy. That
you make it sound like it's really functioning.
You can just go to Republic of Benin, change things and just move them.
Yes, yes. And you could also see what is happening in the advertising sector. You see the loss of revenue to Nigeria and the loss of jobs to Nigerians. Most of them are shot outside Nigeria and they are brought in, which is also what we have to look at. Now,
Anyway, thank you very much, Chris Onyeka. We don't have, any more time on this segment, but this has been very exciting and interesting.